It is October 29th, 2024. It was just your average Tuesday. Nothing big, nothing exciting, nothing memorable was supposed to happen. And then just like Randy Orton hitting an RKO out of nowhere, Nintendo drops this announcement. I have been looking forward to this game for so long, and after finally getting my grubby hands on it, I can certainly say that the wait was worth it. I never got the chance to play the original Xenoblade X when it first released on the Wii U, a console that quite frankly doesn't seem worth going back to as there's no longer any noteworthy exclusives that aren't already on the Switch, meaning that the Wii U no longer has any games. Wait, no, that's the PS5. Nevertheless, just like the first game, Xenoblade X got the remaster treatment, and with it came a new look, a new paint job,
16 times the detail,
some new content, and wait a minute, are those new mechanics I see? I went into this game as blindly as I could. I didn't know most of the plot points, nor was I aware of how in-depth the open world really was. I wanted to have a genuine first experience with everything I came across, to exploring the world, learning the combat mechanics, to doing as many side quests as I possibly could. I mostly made this video as an excuse to talk about the game and just give out my thoughts because I really did enjoy this game. I thought this game was great, which means I'm going to be talking spoilers. So if you for some reason haven't played this game and are thinking on getting it, but you don't want to get spoiled, then yeah, that's your spoiler warning. The only thing I knew from what the community was saying was that this game's story is not as good as the other entries. And I think that's a good starting point for our first topic. The game starts with a grandiose galactic battle between two alien factions, and Earth gets caught right in the middle. Earth gets destroyed, and the remaining survivors of human civilization escape on a huge ship called the White Whale, and then later end up crashing on the planet of Mira. You are then discovered by Elma, which is totally not an important character or hides any secrets from us, no way, who finds us in a pod, wakes us up, and escorts us to the city of New Los Angeles, or better known as New LA. This sequence introduces us to the unknown and mysterious planet of Mira, setting us up and establishing the framework for what's in store for us. Right off the bat, I could tell that the story wasn't going to be as character-driven or as emotionally engaging as the numbered entries. It's just the way you're introduced to the world. Literally the first few scenes, the game is telling you, you see this world? Focus on this. It's not necessarily a flaw, it's just that the game takes a different priority. Instead of immersing you in deeply personal stories like in the other entries, Xenoblade X centers your attention on exploration, survival, and the broader mystery of Mira. It signals early on that this is a game where the world itself takes center stage. And I dig it. Eventually you meet some new characters like Lynn, who seems to have a thing for Skells and even writes Skell fanfiction? Wait, what kind of fanfiction are we talking about here? Anyways, that aside, you do get some funny character interactions depending on your dialogue choices.
You have to look passionately into Nagi's eyes and nod firmly, or you can shrug your shoulders and shake your head. I say raise him up. Oh, okay, you refuse.
You eventually join a military organization called Blade, which is led by the commanding officer, Vandam. I was a bit skeptical whether he was going to survive or not, considering the track record of any character called Vandam in this franchise. Simply put, you do not want to be named Vandam in a Xenoblade game. Our goal is to find the life hold, which contains the pods of the remaining humans. Simple enough, right? At least that's what they tell us at first.
What?
If playing Xenoblade has taught me something, is that Tetsuya Takahashi is a man that does not do simple. My guy likes his plot twists. It turns out we're not truly human, but instead we inhabit robotic bodies called mimeosomes, while the real bodies are stored in the life hold. This explains why our characters are able to have enhanced abilities, as well as able to do actions that normal human bodies would not be able to do otherwise. Things like falling from the top of a cliff and landing without taking fall damage, have insanely high jumps that allow you to reach rooftops of buildings, and even the overdrive, which is unlocked after completing said chapter. In the other games, the playable characters could suffer from fall damage and their movement was more limited. It didn't detract from the experience, but it was certainly less convenient when compared to X. It's because of this detail that I've become convinced that the game utilized these mechanics as a way to foreshadow this plot twist. We're not the only ones searching for the life hold, however. A crime syndicate called the Ganglion is also on the look for it. They were one of the factions responsible for the destruction of Earth, so naturally they act as the antagonistic force for the entirety of the game. So why are they looking for the life hold? To destroy it. Duh. This is where the game's writing begins to show its weak points. While the Ganglion is written as a credible threat, their portrayal lacks nuance. The characters are mostly one-dimensional, defined by their hatred of humanity and little else. Unlike villains from other Xenoblade titles, they don't have complex motivations or ideological conflicts that will make them feel more memorable. Most of the time we see them, they talk about wanting to kill the human race and how it's their destiny to do so. Luxar is the leader of the Ganglion, and unfortunately he also falls in this category. He does get a bit more screen time, but most of the time, it's just him monologuing about destroying the humans, and relative to other characters, he isn't active enough for him to be memorable until the end of the story. This lack of depth is likely a cause of the game's structure. Main story chapters are relatively short, not giving enough time for characters, and overshadowed by the open world exploration and side content. This is a reoccurring problem that is also seen with the main cast. Most of the characters involved don't really go through any meaningful development, so it kind of makes them feel flat. Because of that, I didn't get attached to the main characters as much. It's not that the characters are badly written, it's just that they're not interesting. Except Elma, who has this mysterious background that gets brought up every few moments, as well as Lao. We'll get to him in just a moment. And maybe Lynn, if you like her mishaps with Tatsu.
Now, while I heat the oven, you spread the yogurt down your back too, okay?
Okay. But, shouldn't Tatsu be cleaning off yogurt instead?
What? Don't be silly. We need it spread evenly for the tandoori sauce.
Tatsu is no chicken, Lindley!
Also, Tatsu. I hate this guy. To specify, I'm only talking about the main story. I do know that the Affinity missions add more development to some of these characters, but I'm strictly talking about their involvement in the main story. Now, since we're talking about the characters, throughout the course of the game, you meet a wide variety of characters who can join you on your journey. Some, like Gwyn, Irina, and Lao, are closely tied to the main story, while other characters that live in the city can be recruited but have little to no involvement in the central narrative. Despite this, their presence helps make NLA feel like a vibrant, living city populated with real, breathing individuals. We'll discuss these side characters more in depth later, but for now, let's focus on those directly connected to the story, particularly Lao. Lao is a pathfinder that throughout the course of the story, you can tell that something is off about him. It becomes even more apparent when you do his affinity quest and heart-to-hearts. Through it, we get to learn a little bit of his backstory, like his wife and daughter weren't able to board the white whale, which explains his cold attitude. This all builds up his betrayal, taking the data of the Lifehold's core location. Lao expresses his hatred for the rich and powerful, or the elites, as he calls them, for being the only ones to board the white whale, and blames them for the loss of his family. His hatred runs so deep that it clouds his rational judgment, leading him to willingly ally with the Ganglion, the very faction largely responsible for Earth's destruction. Lao sees the Ganglion's victory as a form of justice against what he perceives as a fundamentally corrupt species. His betrayal isn't just an act of anger, it's a manifestation of profound grief and his unwillingness to let go of the past. While other characters reflect on their former lives on Earth, many expressing sorrow over the loss of loved ones, they ultimately recognize the importance of focusing on humanity's survival. They choose to live in the present, working to shape a new future on Mira. In contrast, Lao remains trapped by his grief, leading him to reject the very idea that humanity deserves a future, making his betrayal a tragic consequence of personal loss and disillusionment. And I really wish the story was focused around these themes. I understand that the narrative wasn't the main focus, as you can tell from the way the game was designed. The game is constantly trying to throw you out there in the open world rather than the narrative.
Hit the streets.
But you just cannot help but think about the what-ifs. There's clear elements here that would have made for a compelling story. I like Lao. He was the only character that I found to be slightly interesting and nuanced, enough to get me invested in his story. I still think they could have done something more with him. It's clear that he cares for some of the people in New LA, like Lynn, Doug, and his Pathfinder comrades, and considering that we've gone on missions with him, there was room for the story to have emotional depth to it. Maybe had they made his betrayal less obvious and fully committed to making him the villain, it would have made for a memorable story. While I wish that was more explored and fleshed out, I can't go too hard on the narrative, as the gameplay portions more than make up for the story's shortcomings. With the data recovered, it's now time to find the Lifehold. With our squad, we engage on our final confrontation with the Ganglion and the Ganglion's leader, Luxar. This time piloting the Vita, the skill associated with who they call the Great One. There's some cool plot twists and reveals that happen, and after all is said and done, we finally recover the Lifehold. Or did we? One post-credits scene later and it's revealed that the Lifehold core has been destroyed on arrival, meaning that their bodies should not be functioning.
It's this planet. It's something about this planet.
This post-credit scene has haunted the minds of Xenoblade X fans for the last 9 years. Part of what made the stories of the other entries so good was the interpersonal relationships between the characters. Each character had their own set of challenges or conflicts they had to overcome, and usually they would be integrated within the main story, which would result in those characters getting more fleshed out, and us as the player would get more emotionally attached to these characters. The problem with the main narrative in X is that it's really difficult to get invested in the characters involved because the main story's pacing is not great. And like I explained earlier, the villains aren't that interesting either. The only character I thought was interesting was Lao, and even so, his betrayal doesn't hit as hard if you don't do his affinity missions and heart-to-hearts. Which is a shame because the premise is genuinely interesting. The mystery surrounding the Lifehold, the Vita, and even the planet of Mira are generally enough to keep you just enticed enough to be invested in the story, but ultimately the pacing and characters don't really do any favors to supplement that premise. Which brings me to the new content introduced in the Definitive Edition, Chapter 13. I'm not going to fully explain the story of Chapter 13, but I will say that it feels very different from the 12 chapters. This chapter is divided into 3 parts, and it's much denser in its narrative, making its story structure feel more in line with what you expect from the numbered entries. Actually, a better comparison might be Future Redeemed or Future Connected. That shift in structure also brings a bit of an issue in my opinion, because the style and pacing of Chapter 13's writing feels so vastly different from the 12 chapters, to the point that it's almost jarring. It kind of breaks that flow that we've gotten so used to. Let me put it to you this way. Where a main story chapter will normally take about 20 to 30 minutes to clear, Act 1 of Chapter 13 alone took me nearly 2 to 3 hours to complete. There's a lot of exposition that happens, a lot of information to process, this being the result of the new elements introduced, one of them being a new character, Alois Bernhold, or as we're going to refer to him as Al. He's the hero who held off the alien forces to allow the white whale to escape. So naturally, everyone hypes him up, talking about him like he's some legendary figure, the kind of person everyone in the group looks up to. And it does make sense why people admire him so much, like he's largely responsible for humanity even having a fighting chance after the destruction of Earth. But I just find him to be an okay character. I enjoyed some of the interactions he had with some of the other characters, but I had some problems with a few aspects of his writing. His inclusion feels shoehorned in, which is evidently seen with the amount of screen time he has. A lot of that time is used to explain his whereabouts, which didn't really give enough time to properly learn about the kind of person he is in a steady pacing. Sure, there's the affinity missions, but even those felt very superficial, only expanding on things we already knew about him, like his selfless nature and love for the world. It's just that you don't get the downtime to properly process his story and care about the guy. He also has this gag where he asks someone else, how's it poppin'? Like he even has this whole conversation with the group explaining the joke. And I'm gonna be honest, I think it's kinda corny. I think it's kinda corny. Granted, he is still a fun character to some extent. He's just a normal goofy dude with the urge to protect humanity, and honestly, I fuck with it. Still, I didn't find his inclusion as natural as the other party members. His initial impression didn't land well for me. The way he is introduced to us is very different when compared to the rest of the cast. Usually when we are introduced to a new member, we are given the space to naturally learn who they are. The missions serve as a conduit for us to see their personalities, and based on their actions, we get to form our own impressions, without other characters telling us how to feel about them. In most cases. With Al, he's presented as the centerpiece of the chapter, being the only one so far who can pilot the Ares Prime, the prototype scale that served as the model for all the others. When we meet him for the first time face to face, the whole group is marveling over Al, and even our dialogue choices reflect that. The point that I'm making is that we're told that this character is cool, instead of us going through the notions of learning about the character ourselves. I think had they found a way to make the introduction just between the player and Al, it would have been a more natural way to get a handle of his personality without having the other characters glazing him at every opportunity and forcing an impression on the player. The rest of the characters don't do much during this chapter. They mostly serve as exposition machines for Al to explain where he was during the Ganglion War, or to fill in bits and pieces of his backstory. It doesn't help that most of the cast still carry the issues seen in the main story. They're just not remotely interesting. They don't have meaningful interactions with each other that get you invested on what's happening, unless they are interacting with Al. It's either that or just dialogue related to the DMAT events. Since we're talking about the DMAT events, the ghosts also make their appearance on Mira for the first time. This is the faction the Ganglion was fighting before Earth was destroyed. We don't really know much about the ghosts aside from them being drawn to the power of the Ares Prime, as well as being responsible or at least somewhat connected to the DMAT events. Elma describes them as the universe corrective system, which doesn't really make much sense to me considering how they've been destroying planets and universes just to get to the Ares. I don't know, maybe I'm not seeing the bigger picture here. They are still an ambiguous faction, so with that in mind, it's very likely they're keeping some things under wraps for the sequel. Kinda like what they did with the Fog Beasts in Future Connected. Also, Lao. You didn't deserve what they did to you in this chapter. This is one problem I had with this story. They teased Lao being alive in the post-credit scene, only to later find out that he's actually dead. The beach that he ended up being stranded on turned out to be the afterlife. Yeah, the guy you see at the end of that cutscene, that's Al, and somehow, using the Ares Prime, reached the afterlife where Lao is located and had a final conversation with him. Why tease a character when you're not even going to go anywhere with him? No storylines, no plot points, he just talks with Al and then dies. Yo, Future Delta here. So, I did some little digging and found out that the Japanese voice actor for Lao passed away a couple of years ago. I don't know if that had any influence in this outcome. Someone else does take over to voice the lines here, but I just thought this was worth mentioning. Take it away, Past Delta. This leads me to my next point, which is that it feels like they took a different direction than what was initially intended in the original game, as this whole chapter goes against the whole theme of the game, which was humanity adapting to this new world and learning to live with the other xenoforms. This is something that Elma throughout the game hammers down on you. Humanity is trying to make peace with the local life and make Mira their new home. But this chapter just goes the opposite route, where you have to leave Mira because of the dematerialization events, which is destroying the planet. So now you're forced to leave the planet and utilize the power of the Ares Prime to go to a different dimension, which completely wastes the mystery and world building they've been setting up about this planet. All of that effort put into the lore of Mira flushed down the toilet like Rhodey from Flushed Away. Like, we're constantly given subtle indications that this planet is not normal. Hell, you get Elma pointing out how is it possible that we're communicating with other xenoforms, since the Xenos are using their native language to communicate with us. And of course, you have the post-credit scene with the whole, it's something about this planet. It completely nulls everything that we've worked for. Every quest that we've done has all been for nothing. Affinity quests, pointless. The Frontier Nav, pointless. Establishing new facilities to facilitate the inhabitants of this planet, pointless. Does this make the chapter bad? Kind of? Because it does discard most of the elements that have been built up beforehand. You spend all of this time trying to get to learn and know about Mira, and all of a sudden, you have to leave everything behind, and it just leaves this unsatisfied resolution. Now, that doesn't mean that the whole chapter is bad, because it does have its moments. We do get some answers to some questions the main story has been setting up, like who the Great One is, who turns out to be Void, the main antagonist of the chapter. He was a scientist obsessed with the ultimate matter, or the conduit, as it was called. Because of his obsession, he gets his mind imprisoned in Volataris by his people. Due to mysterious circumstances, he escaped and possessed the Vita, and managed to rise to power by creating the Ganglion army. His motivations here come down to one thing. He wants to know death, or at least a concept of it. I don't really have any strong opinions about him. I didn't find him memorable since his presence was pretty minimal. Pretty much an underbaked character. I guess that must be like a reoccurring thing with the villains in this game. Considering how hyped up he was by Luxar, I was expecting him to be more involved with the story. Sadly, the chapter's runtime didn't do him any favors, especially with the new elements introduced, as well as the change in story direction. It just seemed like too much for too little time. However, his boss fight was cool, and getting to pilot the Ares Prime in the climax of the fight was peak Xenoblade, despite the quality of the chapter. This is one of those situations where we got hype moments in aura instead of good writing. All I will say is if you're someone that was heavily invested in this world in particular, you are going to be really disappointed and maybe even ticked off with this chapter. But if you're a Xenoblade fan in general, you might find some enjoyment in this chapter because it does contain some pretty huge lore drops that tie it to the overarching universe of Xenoblade. It doesn't reach the level of quality the series is typically known for. Maybe someone might even argue that the original story was better. Personally, I initially found the lore drops to be really exciting, but now that I've had the time to sort my thoughts and think about it, the chapter feels so thematically disconnected from the previous 12 chapters, and I recognize that this is meant to set the stage for the next game, since it ends on a relatively open note and leaves several plot threads unresolved. You're not slick, Takahashi. But if the cost of that setup was sidelining the core themes the game spent 95% of its runtime establishing, I think I would have preferred they kept Xenoblade X its own separate entry or its own separate universe rather than tying it to the numbered entries. You know, the moment I was finally given the freedom to explore, I knew this game was going to be special and keep me playing for days on end. If you've played any of the Xenoblade games, then you should know that the games are well known for its sense of scale and eye-catching landmarks. Normally you would be sent to a big open zone where you could explore that specific area, and each zone would have their own distinct biomes and environments that separate them, so you wouldn't be able to travel between them seamlessly. That is not a problem with Xenoblade X. This game is fully open world, and it truly showcases Monolith Soft's talents for making incredible and visually interesting landscapes. There's a lot of space, but the amount of creatures occupying said space is just perfect enough to where it doesn't look barren. The wildlife, or indigens as the game calls them, play a crucial role in reinforcing the immense scale and atmosphere the game strives to convey. Okay, no, but seriously, what kind of dark magic are these guys pulling off? Because there's no way that they were able to pull this off on the Wii U and then later remaster it on the Switch with more content but taking less storage space than the original game. How is this even possible? Are the programmers making deals with the devil? Mira has 5 different areas with their own unique biomes. Well, 6 if you want to count Volataris. Primordia is the first continent you explore, and it's also the area you start out in. It's a very open and vast zone with grassy plains accompanied by rivers and mountains. It's fair to say that this is the Gaur Plains of the game. You have Noctilum, which is a jungle/forest type of biome mixed in with swamps and waterfalls. Oblivia is your standard desert biome, probably the least visually interesting in my opinion, but to be fair, I am not a fan of desert biomes. Sylvalum is probably my favorite of the biomes aesthetically, which is funny because this is also a desert biome in some way, but with a more ethereal twist. I don't know if ethereal is the right word, but it certainly has a sense of mystique. And finally, Koldros, which is the volcanic biome and the location of the Ganglion's base. You occasionally get told how dangerous Mira is through its narrative, and it's reflected so much in the gameplay. You'll encounter a lot of high-level enemies as you travel these lands, even in Primordia, and they were not afraid of placing enemies 5, hell, even 20 to 30 levels above you when you start out. So you're going to be dying a lot in the early game, or maybe it was just me. Maybe it was just a skill issue for my part. As if the monsters weren't enough, you'll occasionally come across small ganglion fortresses that add an extra touch of danger and world building. It really gives that impression that the ganglion is a constant threat that we should watch out for. It's a cool detail. Very often they have treasure chests in some place inside, or it's just on top of one of the buildings, so you're incentivized to storm these settlements and reap the rewards. Since we're on the topic of treasure, you'll often come across various artifacts scattered throughout the map. Interacting with them rewards you with things like experience points and battle points, which are useful for upgrading your skills. But that's not the main reason I like them. What really stands out to me is how they take the shape of different objects, alien wreckage, containers, broken vehicles, etc, etc. Now you might be wondering, what's so special about that? For me, it's the way they spark the imagination. Imagine this, you're exploring a world shrouded in mystery. You find a broken down vehicle that looks like it came from New Los Angeles. It may not have any direct relevance to your mission, but its presence can tell a story. Maybe a squad of Blade members was serving the area and got ambushed by indigents, or perhaps even the Ganglion. That contributes to the world's atmosphere. It exemplifies environmental storytelling. I found myself really surprised with how much I wanted to interact with the world and just try to do the objectives. I think it also helps that they give you a lot of tools to cover more ground without making the pace feel like a slog. Listen, Monolith really outdid themselves with this world, and all of this is further enhanced by the incredible soundtrack made by one of the legends in the music industry. Composed by the GOAT himself, Hiroyuki Sawano, mostly known for his work on a few anime shows. You might have heard of Attack on Titan, maybe not, who knows. It's a very unknown anime, very obscure anime, wink wink. His style of music is different from what we are accustomed to in the Xenoblade series, but in the context of this game, it works really well. His tracks amplify the sense of scale and wonder when exploring Mira, creating an almost surreal illusion that the world is even larger than it appears. When you get to Sylvalum, the music complements the continent's atmosphere, a mysterious, otherworldly environment. I really paid $60 for a Hiroyuki Sawano soundtrack alongside a video game. That's crazy. The battle themes are unique. It's one of the more noticeable aspects that separates X from the numbered entries. They carry that bombastic feeling he's known for, setting up the combat moments quite nicely. There are some tracks that I felt were really bizarre, like the main battle theme, Black Tar. When it starts, it's all good. You have the build up, you have the electric guitar ramping up, setting up the tone of the battle. You're jamming to the music, you get pumped up, and then the lyrics drop.
In the distant land, we're stuck on a whole different planet.
Despite that, I warmed up to it after a couple of battles. Still, the soundtrack is just a constant stream of banger after banger after banger, with songs like Sona Sofern and The Key We've Lost being a few of the standouts to me. Sawano was the perfect man to capture the essence of this game. Humanity's survival in an uncharted territory. And also brought what I think is the best track in Xenoblade, objectively. Don't at me. The theme of the Tyrants, Uncontrollable.
Show us light from now. Show us sight for where we can go. In the game with no guiding light. Do you know where is the goal? Don't just follow. We can try this believing now. We lose so many sorrows, but we can swallow. Gonna be our star.
Yo, are we back? Oh, okay, we're back. Oh, I lost signal there for a second. I don't know what happened. So, where were we? Oh yeah, the Tyrants.
The Tyrants are the elite monsters that roam around Mira. They are stronger than your average Joe, some of them even hidden in places you least expect them. You can identify them by their unique health and their unique naming conventions. I had problems dealing with these Tyrants early in the game, and if I was unprepared, sometimes I'd struggle against those congruent with my level. Some Tyrants, especially the super bosses, have unique abilities where you're forced to use a certain skill to stand a fighting chance. One thing I always like about Xenoblade games is their use of elite enemies. They don't just make the world realistic and dangerous, they also act as organic skill checks, testing your knowledge of the combat mechanics in a way the main story bosses are unable to do. Whether it's optimizing your arts rotation, leveraging team synergy, or just understanding how to use the overdrive, the nature of the game requires you to learn its systems to progress, and the Tyrants are there to prove whether you mastered those mechanics or not. It's really satisfying hunting these suckers down, if not to defeat them, certainly just to listen to Uncontrollable. That track alone makes every fight worth it. Sadly, if you've mastered the overdrive, you won't get to hear the song for very long. Overdrive has its own song when you activate it, and considering how you're going to need the overdrive to defeat most of the Tyrants, you won't get to listen to Uncontrollable very often, unless you're a Giga Chat and fight the Tyrants without using overdrive. One little detail about the Tyrants is that some of them have these little crowns above their health bar. I was really confused to what this meant, so I looked it up, and apparently the game records the amount of players each individual tyrant has killed. What the hell? This is the only game that I know where the enemy AI is given some sort of ranking or power ranking for murdering us. Like, what? But enough about these monsters and tyrants. This is a new planet, so naturally, we are colonizing it. With that said, we are going to need a system that can give us information and resources. As you explore, you will inevitably encounter red pillars of light. These pillars give out the locations of FN sites, and in these sites you're able to install data probes, which allow you to gather data of the surrounding area. Some of this data can give you the location of treasure, tyrants, or even quests that may or may not be available to take, depending on whether you've cleared certain conditions. And by clearing these objectives, it can increase your survey rate. Reaching certain thresholds in your survey rate can net you some pretty neat rewards, like money, items, reward tickets, which are really useful if you're farming for rare items, and energy clips, which is a new thing that we will talk about later. Just put a pin on that. Let me preface by saying that when I'm referring to the Frontier Nav, I don't just mean the map. I mean the system as a whole. They put thought into the progression, and the Frontier Nav plays a big role in it. You're pretty much given reign to go wherever you want. So there had to be a system in place that tracks your progression to ensure you're ready to take on certain missions. For example, certain chapters require you to explore specific regions like Oblivia and raise the area's survey rate by completing objectives such as installing probes, finding treasure, defeating tyrants, stuff like that, right? This naturally encourages players to engage with the environment constantly and become familiar with each continent's layout, geography, and hazards. Xenoblade X avoids overwhelming the player with artificial checklists or superficial side content. Instead of constantly pulling your attention with flashy icons and repetitive tasks, the way Frontier Nav operates encourages a natural and less intrusive way of exploration, where you're not being led by the nose, but instead are rewarded for genuine curiosity. No game, I don't want to save civilians, I just want to climb this mountain and get the treasure. It makes the act of traversal and discovery feel purposeful, with mechanics that reinforce engagement rather than dilute it. This keeps gameplay from feeling stagnant. It encourages you to go out there and discover things. Not only because of the world's level design, but also because it is required for you to do so if you want to progress the main story. It's not even trying to be subtle about it. The game clearly wants you to prioritize exploration above all else. There's another functionality that I haven't mentioned yet, and this is more involved with the probes, but by installing them around the map, you're granted access to certain resources that you otherwise wouldn't be able to obtain in normal gameplay. Case in point, Miranium. Once you install a data probe, you are able to install other types of probes that give you resources as you play through the game. Kind of like getting a passive income every set amount of times. So if you use the mining probe, for example, you can extract Miranium, which is a really important resource if you're looking to get good gear. I won't go too deep explaining this, but the thing I like about this system is how non-intrusive it is. Like, there's so much to explore on this world that sometimes you forget that the Frontier Nav is a thing. So at times I just forgot to update my probes, and other times I hit the maximum storage capacity for Miranium. It just speaks so much how robust and well crafted this world is. Like, it's so easy to lose yourself in it. Everything has a rhythm and flow that doesn't pull you away from the immersion. Sometimes your curiosity leads you to high-level tyrants that can whack the shit out of you in one hit, but even with those strong enemies acting as an indirect restriction, it still doesn't undermine the motivation to keep exploring. This planet is capable of pushing you down, but you're also capable of fighting back. Did I forget to mention the giant mechas? If you're a mecha fan and you like piloting mechas in a big alien planet, and you also like fighting the most ruthless, unhinged monsters in said alien planet, Xenoblade X is the game for you. With a world this big in scale, there had to be something that would let us travel between these environments more conveniently. Once you obtain the scales, the way you experience Mira is drastically different, and it's not an exaggeration. I'll talk a little bit more about scale combat when we reach that segment, but all you need to understand here is how the world design feels inherently built around the use of scales. And that is not a bad thing at all. The scales give you more mobility, significantly expanding your range of exploration beyond what's possible on foot. You can easily leap over cliffs, you cover more ground faster, and when you get your hands on that flight module, it further expands how you traverse Mira. It opens areas that were otherwise impossible to reach on foot, giving you that sense that you're finally able to explore Mira the way it was intended to be. It's a testament to the meticulous thought the devs put into designing Mira. And it still feels good to travel on foot, and there are some areas that you can only explore on foot. It changes the whole dynamic on world traversal, but it doesn't fully undermine normal boots on the ground exploration. At times I felt like I was playing a Transformer game. Being able to transform your scale into a vehicle brought me back to the old days when I used to play the Transformers movie game on the PSP. Good times. Let me also talk about the Rosvelk, because that scale might be one of the most fun additions in any Xenoblade game ever. You get a mecha with a katana and it can transform into a jet. If you tell me this shit ain't one of the coldest things in Xenoblade, you are objectively wrong. When I got my hands on the scale, I completely threw the fast travel in the garbage bin. Driving this around the map was so much fun. The vanilla scales already made traveling more convenient, but the cruiser mode completely elevates it to a whole other level. Soaring through the skies at breakneck speeds, just vibing and enjoying yourself. I could genuinely just stay here flying this thing for hours without doing anything else. Too bad it sucks in combat because of its archetype though. I still didn't have a problem using it because most of the time I would just battle outside the scale, so it wasn't that big of a deal for me. I don't know guys, I think these Monolith Soft developers might be good at this open world thing. I don't know, like, it's looking like it. I don't really play open worlds that often, but from the ones that I have played, I can pretty much say with confidence that Xenoblade X might have the best open world I've ever had the chance to experience, and that's not a hyperbole either. I genuinely wish I could experience this world again for the first time. For you to explore Mira, you'll obviously have to engage in battle against the Indigens or other adversaries. For Monolith, it was really important that the main gameplay elements more than made up for the shortcomings of the game's story, and that they did. The combat is objectively the best one in the series. Don't argue with me, I will not budge on this. It functions very similarly to the combat in Xenoblade 1, so if you're familiar with that style of combat, you will have a very similar experience here. However, that's if we're talking surface level, because, boy, the systems this time are more complex and there's a lot to digest. You have a set variety of arts for every weapon, and you're able to customize your selection in any way you wish. The only limitation being you can only pick a maximum of 8 arts. Once you use an art, you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can use it again. This is where the similarities end, because the combat system goes much deeper. Secondary cooldowns are one of those elements. When an art is in a usable state, it charges a second gauge that once it's fully charged, it can enhance your selected art. So if you're using offensive arts, it can give you more damage, while if you're using blue arts, they can give you enhanced buffs. And these enhanced effects are nothing to scoff at either. So the player can decide whether they want to take their time and use these enhanced arts or not. It adds this layer of strategy because you have to consider whether it's worth going for these enhanced effects, depending on the situation. Do I let the art charge to do more damage? Do I go for enhanced buffs or debuffs? Or do I want to immediately use this other art to grind TP in battle? Ultimately, you can decide what strategy you want to go with. The one caveat to this, however, is that these arts take too long to charge, so you're not going to be using these secondary effects often in the early game. At that stage, the game is still easing players into its mechanics, and you're often better off sticking with quicker actions. The strategic depth really starts to open up later on once you've upgraded your arts and skills, reducing cooldowns and making enhanced effects more accessible. That said, there is a way to shorten cooldown times much earlier than expected. Quick cooldown go brrrr. Quick cooldown is a new mechanic to this game that was not in the original version. As the name suggests, you can use the quick cooldown to utilize an art that is still recharging. So if you're fighting a low level enemy and want to kill it quick, just spam your strongest art and save yourself some time. This mechanic has its own little gauge at the bottom, so you can only use the system a certain amount of times, and it fully recharges once you finish the battle. So it's designed to be a flexible but balanced resource. Oh, who am I kidding? This shit is busted! A neat detail here is that the amount of meter consumed depends on how much cooldown time remains on the art. So if you use a quick cooldown while, say, the art is 80% charged, it's gonna take less of the meter compared to an art that is like 10 to 20% charged. Also, remember the energy clips that we talked about early in the video? Those items increase your quick cooldown meter's maximum capacity. From what I've played, the only way to acquire these is by increasing your survey rate, which ties back into the game's exploration systems, so not only are you encouraged to explore Mira for XP and treasure, but you're also gradually upgrading core combat tools like quick cooldown. It's a clever way to tie world exploration and the combat mechanics together, making your journey feel rewarding beyond just leveling up. It feels like you're genuinely getting stronger. It's not just leveling up and getting higher numbers, but it's like your character is organically getting powerful. This mechanic honestly addresses one of my long-standing nitpicks with Xenoblade's combat system as a whole. Maybe it's just me still trying to wrap my head around the nuances. Each entry introduces its own take on combat, each layered and intricate in different ways, but the early game across the series always feels like a slog. Arts take ages to recharge, and you're constantly having to optimize every input just to deal reasonable damage. Bottom line is that it's slow, and not always engaging at first. Quick cooldown remedies that early game drag in a way by making the flow of combat a lot smoother and faster, giving you easier access to higher damage output, making the first few hours of the game more enjoyable. But here's the thing, like I said earlier, this mechanic is insanely powerful. Oh, and did I forget to mention you can also use quick cooldown to activate the secondary effects of your arts? Yep, if your art is in a usable state, you can use quick cooldown to charge the secondary cooldown and activate the enhanced effects of your selected art. A mechanic that essentially lets you bypass the only limitation that prevents you from living a power fantasy was not on my bingo card for this game. It solves the sluggish pacing of combat when you're starting out, but it also makes the combat a bit too lenient. Like, I did die a lot playing through this, but I think out of all the Xenoblade games that I've played, this is probably the easiest one, in my opinion, of course. I'm sure the original game probably wasn't as easy as the definitive edition is. I don't exactly know the changes they made to the enemies and monsters here. I don't know what type of balancing changes they made. I don't know if they made some changes to acclimate to the quick cooldown, but if they did, then I think y'all need to work on that a little bit more. I'm still not sure how I truly feel about this mechanic because it does fix the one problem the combat has, in my opinion, but it also brings a new issue, which is giving you more power in a game that already gives you a lot of it. It's a fun mechanic, but I also think that it takes away some of the nuance from the original combat system and makes things more unbalanced in our favor. I really hope in the next game they bring this mechanic back and refine it, just because if executed perfectly, it can make combat more enjoyable and fun. Alright, now let's get on to the meat and potatoes, the signature dish that Xenoblade X offers, the Overdrive. No, we're not doing this again. Let's get back on track. You unlock Overdrive after completing Chapter 5. I found myself very overwhelmed and intimidated by it at first because I just didn't know what the hell is going on. There's a lot happening on screen, a lot of components to keep track of, especially when you're learning how it works. But surprisingly, it's not as complex as I expected it to be. Sure, there's multiple components to keep tabs on. You have to keep track of the counter, art availability, and the timer to make sure you don't run out of overdrive. Knowing your art combinations is crucial to prolonging the timer and increasing your counter to get the most out of this mode. As soon as you get good at managing these components, the overdrive usage practically becomes second nature. It's a tool that exponentially amplifies your combat ability, rewarding you for your quick thinking and art management. This mechanic is the equivalent of chain attacks from the other games, but it's more fun and engaging. I say this is more interactive than the other combat mechanics we've seen in the numbered titles. You get to be more in control, choosing your positioning, your art selection becomes less restrictive, and outcomes aren't as dependent on arbitrary factors. You can activate the overdrive once you have 3000 TP, which you can gain by doing certain actions or clearing certain conditions. Once it's activated, the cooldown for each art is significantly reduced, meaning that you're able to use arts one after the other in rapid succession. On top of that, the arts now have a tertiary cooldown, meaning that you can further amplify the damage or effects of your arts. It's like going Super Saiyan 2 after going Super Saiyan. Now, I'm not going to explain the whole mechanic because even though I don't think it's a complicated system, it is still a mechanic that has a good amount of depth to where it would take me about 15 minutes to explain the whole thing. Case in point, and I'm not trying to extend the duration of this video longer than it should, so I'll leave that to the experts. All you need to know is that if you know how to use Overdrive, you are already going to be having the super bosses in a cold sweat. Scared shitless even. It's a really strong tool, and it's even further augmented in this version of the game because of quick cooldown. This completely shifts the dynamic of the mechanic. Originally designed with a slow ramp up, the counter would take time to build, so you needed to have good timing and execution. While the arts have a faster recharge time in this state, if you messed up once, it could cost you valuable time you need to build a counter, or just the overdrive altogether. Of course, this is all assuming you're not using skills or augments related to overdrive. In those cases, it gives you more room for error. The quick cooldown opens up more accessibility, making the overdrive easier to exploit, thus building the counter a lot smoother, opening up a new avenue for a different and more aggressive playstyle. Now, I won't lie and say that it wasn't fun, because it most certainly is. It lets me live a power fantasy. The combination of overdrive, Ghostwalker, Core Crusher, and Blossom Dance is enough to give Supersonic a run for his money. This mechanic surprised me with how interactive it is. Because of the cooldown time, we often need to have a more methodical approach and think when it's the optimal time to use the arts to get the best and most efficient damage or effect that you can get. Consequently, this leads to sometimes making combat slow paced, as I established earlier in the video, and even though it's commonly seen in the early game, after a while it starts to pick up pace. But the methodical approach still remains. You still have to wait for your arts to recharge, and you still need to have a good game sense. The nature of Xenoblade combat gives you room to think. It gives you the time to observe the current situation and to respond accordingly. Overdrive is the antithesis of what I just explained. When you activate it, you get this vibe like you've just changed to a whole different genre. You're no longer playing an RPG, this is a hack and slash now. Scratch that, this is a Muzo game right now. It's faster paced, the timer is on the forefront of your screen, so you need to be quick with your decision making. But all of this doesn't matter if you don't have specific types of arts to get most out of overdrive. And I'm not just talking about maximizing damage, because it isn't just about getting bigger numbers. This is a versatile mechanic. You're able to use it for other purposes. You're running low on HP and you need to heal up, you can do it with overdrive. You're grinding tyrants and want to boost the XP you get when defeating them, you can do it with overdrive too. It brings a lot of options for the player, and they can decide for what purpose to use the overdrive. All these reasons I listed are why I like this mechanic so much. It's a different approach from what I've seen in the numbered titles. And if I'm being honest, I don't think I'll be able to play the other games without overdrive. I'm gonna keep it a buck. Here's me praying that overdrive, or at least something similar to it, makes a return for Xenoblade 4. This game follows various aspects and formulas that you'd see in a MMO. One such aspect is the capability to pick a class for your playable character. As you keep playing, you're able to level up your class. By leveling up your class, you are given skills that can also be used with a class that's completely unrelated to the skill you unlocked. Maxing out your class level allows you to develop the next class branches, with each branch giving you a set of melee, ranged, and specific arts that are tied to the weapons of that class. Take a shot every time I say class, I dare you, because we're not stopping. When you've maxed out a branch, you will be able to choose the weapons from that branch in an entirely separate class. Say for instance you maxed out the duelist branch, you'll be able to use the longsword and assault rifle in another class. This is great. The system gives you the incentive to experiment with different classes and weapon types, and you get rewarded for it. It also opens up a plethora of customization features. You're able to make your own unique builds, constantly making the experience feel refreshing. You're constantly mix and matching different weapons and skills, shuffling your playstyle and trying new strategies. I didn't truly know what weapon to go for at first. I was just so overwhelmed by the amount of weapons and options provided. I was leaning for the photon sword at first, but some of my friends convinced me to go for the longsword because of its synergy with Core Crusher. That was all it took to convince me. But I did try out different weapons, like I was experimenting with the knife, I was experimenting with the ray gun to see like if I did like those weapons. I did end up liking those weapons, but at the end, I just decided to go with the longsword. It's just, you know, it's the old reliable, it's the tried and true, you can't go wrong with the longsword. It goes without saying that some classes and weapons are better than others, but ultimately, no weapon feels too weak, at least from my experience. Every weapon has its own speciality. You can make a solid build with any weapon. The only thing stopping you is your creativity. The point I'm trying to make here is that the game offers a wide array of options to suit your playstyle. You get to express yourself through your builds, and at the end of the day, it's entirely up to you to decide what kind of approach fits you best. We covered how the skills operate in the open world, but how do they work in combat? Entering combat with the scales also feels different altogether. Using arts consumes fuel from your scales, so there's an element of resource management added to combat. While it's not entirely different from battles on the ground, there are some other changes. One of them involving the overdrive, which functions quite differently from how it normally does. It brings multiple effects, like your arts not consuming fuel, and another is increasing the frequency of cockpit time, which is an effect that recharges your arts if they are in cooldown. Art combinations don't really affect the way skill overdrive works. Instead, it's divided into several rounds. When overdrive is activated, you start at the first round and are given a set amount of time to take advantage of its effects. When the timer expires, there's a chance overdrive will extend, pushing you onto the next round. However, the more extensions occur, the lower your chances become of triggering another round. This is something I didn't initially understand. I feel like the game wasn't quite clear with how overdrive on scales functioned. It's a strange change that I personally didn't really like as much. It's just really random and takes away some of that control that I liked from the normal overdrive. That aside, I think they rightfully captured the awesome feeling of using a mecha for combat. The scale arts generally have a long cooldown compared to normal arts, and I think it emphasizes the weight of these attacks. Some of these arts hit hard, and some of them are very effective when inflicting certain status effects, like staggering them. Using a scale to fight gigantic enemies levels the playing field, making it much easier to take on massive indigents that would have otherwise tanked your normal attacks. And this is only scratching the surface, because you can also customize your scales and the arts they can have. Well, most of them. I'm not going to talk about those. I barely use the scales for combat myself, and whenever I did use them, I would just use Agashira Cannon and delete enemies from the timeline. To put it simply, they're very situational for combat. 8 times out of 10, I've battled without the scale, and it's not that they're bad, but it feels more restricting, especially when you have a variety of good skills and arts already at your disposal. TLDR, they're hype. And that's enough. Side quests are arguably one of the most important elements in any open world game. It's the catalyst that structures player interaction within the world itself. Very often in modern open world games, they tend to have mundane and bland objectives that have no consequence or change in the game, with quests that fail to immerse the player due to their lack of depth or not giving you that extra taste you're looking for in the world building, discouraging players from engaging further with the world around them. And that's a big red flag, because big open worlds with nothing of substance to do leads to a true combo of closing the game and uninstalling. Xenoblade X does not fall in this category. If you were to ask me, what is the core of Xenoblade X? What is the main bulk of this game? It would definitely be the side content. Let me preface by saying that this game has 4 types of quests. There's the main missions, which are pretty self-explanatory, they just drive the story forward. There's the basic missions, which are the more mundane stuff, like collecting a certain amount of items or killing a certain amount of enemies. They're similar to the quests you see in Xenoblade 1 than anything else. There's the side missions that have you interacting more with the people from NLA as well as the life forms in Mira. They appear frequently. And when I say frequently, I mean they will keep you busy for around 200 plus hours, give or take. Yeah, there's a lot of side missions. And last but certainly not least, the affinity missions, which I'll explain later because that kinda needs its own segment. But for now, let's talk about the normal side missions you get throughout your adventures. Very frequently, you'll get green indicators popping up on the map. These bring you specific requests from NPCs, and you get to interact with some of the people both in New LA and outside of it. And we get missions from all sorts of sentient beings, from humans to the natives of the planet like the Napon, to other races like the Prones. Normally, you would have to complete multiple objectives for you to finish the quest. What sets these quests apart from the basic missions is their inclusion of self-contained storylines and characters. Sometimes they are one-shot quests from certain characters, sometimes they are overarching storylines where you will have to complete multiple quests for you to see the whole story of the characters involved. Additionally, some of these missions feature branching outcomes based on your decisions, which can even influence the world around you. One such example involves introducing a new race to live in New LA. There's a mission where you're tasked with freeing xenoforms held captive inside a ganglion fortress. Completing this mission reveals that the Prones are split into 2 tribes, the Tree Clan and the Cavern Clan, the latter being the one aligned with the Ganglion. By rescuing the Tree Clan Prones, they eventually join forces with humanity and become residents of New LA. You'll even see them walking around the city as citizens. The fact that you can never learn that the Prones have 2 clans, with one of them opposing the Ganglion, is crazy. The only time you see the Prones in the main story is when they're siding with the Ganglion, acting as an enemy force. You can play through the entirety of the main story doing the bare minimum side content, and assume that all Prones are villains. You'll never be able to uncover the nuances of their culture, learn about their traditions, and witness them working alongside humans to stop the Ganglion. And that's the beauty of these side missions. They expand on elements the main story didn't have time to explore, while also leaving a real impact on the world. Man, I love me when side missions have good world building. Another quest has you building a water plant in Primordia. Seems like after the Manon moved in, New LA is running short on water. Completing said quest creates a new landmark you can use to fast travel, as well as start off a new chain of quests involving the new water plant. One of these missions has you investigating the water plant after some cocoons have unknowingly appeared and invaded the facility. Making your way there, you'll later find the remaining survivor. Having the cocoons spread out and only one survivor gives you a bit of a subtle idea of what's going on, but you're focused on making sure the survivor comes out unscathed. We handle business as usual, but the sole remaining researcher gets attacked by an indigent. We put the beat down on the indigent, and then we get an ID from one of the researchers, which is definitely not a hint to a potential plot twist. At a certain point in the quest, she tells us that she doesn't feel well and she wants to take a shower. And then you're given a choice. Allow her to shower or refuse. Let's put this on hold. Regardless of your choice, you later investigate the terminal and read the logs of the research team, and it's revealed that every person that worked in that facility got attacked by this indigent and now have a parasite egg inside their bodies. And being exposed to water turns them into these monstrosities. Now, who just got attacked by this indigent? Oh, if you chose to let her take a shower, this happens. Multiple missions apply this concept, however making the wrong choice doesn't have any long-lasting consequences, so you personally don't get punished for making the wrong choice, but the NPCs involved in them will be affected by your actions, and it sucks when it happens. In a good way. Well, not in a good way for them, but what I'm trying to say is that your choices have weight. You are given insight to how these folks are adapting to their new life on Mira. Some of them are doing better than others, but some rely on your help to be able to make ends meet and complete their missions for the sake of humanity. Over time, members of other races and different groups will also ask for your help, and sometimes your decisions will ultimately lead to their survival, happiness, or bad end. Even though these choices don't affect the main plot, they give these smaller stories a sense of belonging within a much larger world. Everyone is trying to pull their own weight, and you get to witness that firsthand. Your choices matter, and that gives you a compelling reason to engage with these missions. Honestly, I wish a lot of open world games did this sort of thing. I know that it requires a lot from the developers to plan all these storylines and quests, but it just gives the game that extra meat on the bone. By completing a series of missions, you will also be able to unlock certain game features, such as being able to unlock arm manufacturers. Brief explanation, arm manufacturers bring you weapons and gear in the shop. You use Muranium to upgrade the manufacturers. By upgrading them, you get better gear. Simple as that. Another feature is the ability to unlock slots on your gear for more augments, which is incredibly useful if you're trying to go for the most optimal builds. So yeah, if you think doing these missions is a waste of time, you're technically right, but you do get some useful things out of them and some interesting world building. What else can you ask for? Let's move on to the affinity missions. Unlike normal missions, they feature fully voice-acted cutscenes. They have you interacting with some of the more notable characters, and completing these missions will unlock some of these characters, making them available as party members. Another thing to keep in mind is that the game locks you out of doing the story missions or any other affinity quest if you have an affinity mission active. In addition, some missions restrict you from using a certain character. Once you accept one of these missions, you have to commit to it. I'm guessing they did this to prevent any chance of soft locking. Since there are quests that can affect the world's behavior in some ways, some missions use characters from other affinity missions, so it's a measure they took to prevent things from getting messy. I found myself doing every single one of these missions before completing the main story. you are introduced to a generally likable cast of characters, and Bose, you get to learn their backstories and the roles they play in all of this. Most of them don't really majorly contribute to the main story, but we get to see how some of these characters have adapted to Mira in great detail. They put a lot of care and attention into them, offering meaningful insight into their personal conflicts, backstories, and ambitions for the future. These characters also go through real growth over time, evolving through their experiences. It helps them feel like living, breathing individuals, not just lifeless NPCs meant to fill out the map or pad out the game's runtime. Doing these missions and learning about the people that live in New LA enhances the main story's narrative experience because, as I mentioned previously, these people are trying their best to live day-to-day lives while trying to find the life hole. With that in mind, you get this little pressure on your shoulders when you start a main mission, not in a literal sense, but more so you trying to immerse yourself type of way. You naturally get attached to these characters, and because of that, it adds weight to the events of the main story. I get some people who want to speedrun the main missions to get access to certain mechanics, but I found that taking your time and experiencing the affinity missions definitely enriched the way I experienced the main narrative. If there's one thing Takahashi and his team consistently excel at, it's world building. The world building in this game is great, with missions serving as a medium to give us insight into the culture of other Xenos. You get to learn stuff like the Monon being a pacifist society, but also being very technologically advanced, so we get to see events like them helping the humans with building their skills and deal with other machine-related ordeals, while the humans introduce the Monon to some human customs and cultures, like the food for instance. They get exposure to one of the greatest foods of all time, the almighty pizza.
Pizza time.
Understandably, they become obsessed with it, so much so that they order a whole supply in a Chapter 13 mission.
We ordered a lot of pies, cleared out our entire supply of toppings.
You have got to be. It just had to be today, didn't it?
Finally, a game that respects this delicacy. It's things like this that we get to see pretty frequently. The exchange of cultures between Xenos and inhabitants of New LA show that they put a good amount of care and thought to make sure the world is diverse and interesting. Of course, when we have different races and species of Xenos, unfortunately, it's only natural for some people to hold some prejudice. Well, we'll get to you in a minute, but I want to talk about another mission first. Alien Nation is a standout mission that contributes meaningfully to the world building. An NPC named Alex asks you to gather 3 Monon for what he claims is a seminar. However, it's soon revealed that the request was a trap. His true plan was to kill these Monon in cold blood. Alex harbors a deep hatred for aliens, explaining that the Xenos that destroyed their home are not the only threat, while also adding that because the Monon possess advanced alien technology, they are even more dangerous than the Prones. The mission provides a branching path. The player can choose to stop Alex or passively observe. If you choose the former, you'll save the lives of the Monons, while stating that they are still hopeful their races can cooperate despite people like Alex. If you choose to observe, 2 of the Monon will die and will no longer be seen in New LA, and the mission log will take it as you siding with Alex. Completing this mission will later reveal that he forms an anti-Xeno group with other Blade members. Wait a minute. Xenoblade. Takahashi, you bastard. I really like this mission. It's probably one of my favorite side missions of the whole game. It's another prime example of your choices having consequences. It's a side mission with actual substance. It reveals that not all humans share the same sentiment toward the alien races they now coexist with. So on top of having to deal with the constant conflict from the outside, they also have to deal with socio-political conflicts within New LA. And what makes this mission so effective is how realistic it is. The world feels more lived in and complex because we get to see those small but powerful moments like this, where the side missions reflect on a certain conflict within the world and expands on it. In this case, it shines on the socio-political issues within New LA. While not all humans take this extremist approach, you can see that some citizens are very judgmental and hesitant over the prospect of having different races take residence. There's even a whole affinity quest revolving this topic, where you have to team up with this bozo. Bose. It becomes clear that he firmly believes all Xenos are inherently bad, convinced that because some aliens were responsible for the destruction of his home, and the loss of his friends, every alien must be the same. Over the course of his questline, he gets exposed to the kindness of other Xenos. An item given by a Manon becomes pivotal to completing a mission. When we first meet him, he isn't really a likable character, but over time we get to see slow growth from him. That by the end of this questline, he sees the error of his ways. As a result, in his final heart-to-heart, he lets go of his previous judgments of the Xenos, deciding that he wants to take this opportunity to share the teachings of the Buddha with them. Basically, he's not the same person he was back when we first met him. These are just a couple of examples of how the game handles the world building. Everyone we meet is new to Mira, and because of that, we get to learn about the world alongside them. As they adapt and come to understand their new home, they also grow as characters in an organic fashion. It almost feels like they're real people. And there's still more that I haven't talked about. This game tackles a lot of topics and themes that could turn this video into a 10+ hour length video. But I don't want to pad out the video any longer than it has to be. It's already long as it is. With all of that said, due to the variety of missions, you tend to get invested and you naturally direct your attention to complete the side content to the point you lose track of time. I personally was telling myself, I'll do one more mission before starting the new chapter, only to then find a new side mission and then perpetuate the cycle once again.
Psst, hey.
Oh, what was that?
You know you want to do that side mission. Come on, just do it, man. Just do it. What are you waiting for? Why are you wasting your life here? Just do that mission. The story missions can wait. They can wait. The fate of humanity doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What's the point of saving humanity if you can't even deliver a whole pizza pie to this bum? This one mission is gonna change everything, bro. I promise you. Just do it. Do it!
Alright, bet. I'm a big fan of how they structured the side content because you know what you're going into. Like, if you want to do fetch quests, the basic missions are right there. And you can even complete them while doing other missions. Having a variety of missions to do while not feeling like a repetitive task is not an easy feat, but I think this game really nailed it. They were just so engaging. I could not stop accepting each mission. It's amazing that this game has the amount of characters it has and manages to give them enough time and attention to develop them and make them feel like an integral part of this world. It's great. I'ma keep it a buck. I consider these the real main missions of this game. If it wasn't for the fact that we got some incredible games this year, I might have dared say that this would have been my game of the year. It brings so much to the table for anyone that is interested in open world games. I couldn't help but feel giddy whenever I used one of the skills, whether it was to fly around or to fight behemoths or tyrants or these big ass monsters. It is a game that caters to the fans of the genre in so many ways. And listen, bro, I know some people argue that open worlds are oversaturated in modern gaming, and to be fair, it kinda is. But Xenoblade Chronicles X is a game that was ahead of its time, and I think I can very comfortably say that it defined the open world genre as a whole, or at least it got close to it. Developers that are working on open world games need to learn and take notes from this game because it is mind-boggling how well this game is designed. It feels minimalistic, yet the small details and nuances in the world design give it a sense of richness and intrigue. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the only way I can describe it. The game's main narrative may not have been a home run, sure, but the gameplay elements are excellent enough that it completely overshadows the faults to the point that I'm willing to overlook them. And the faults are not even that bad, like they're negligible. Well, not if you're someone that liked Mira and played Chapter 13, that is. If you guys made it this far in the video, can I get some salutes in the comments for Mira? Like, damn. That's tough, bro. The definitive edition of this game elevates it to a whole new level, and I might dare say that this could be my favorite in the series? I haven't fully decided on that yet, because Xenoblade 3 was my favorite before this game dropped, so I'll probably need to replay it before I can say for sure. But that is for another day. I give Xenoblade X 6 pizzas out of 4. Yeah, this game good.